Chapter 15. Warding. Letting the potion sit overnight had done wonders. What had been a grainy mush was now a dark, thick pigment, smooth as oil. Amira stirred the mixture, folding wisps of ka into it as she did. One hand held the spoon, and the other worked over the air, waggling through empty space to one that couldn't see the magic. Thadrid watched closely, Thadrid at his side. The knight yawned, rubbing at the dark circles under his eyes. His hair was disheveled, and he still wore last night's clothes. Amira would guess that his conquest had been successful. She curled her lip a little at that thought. Then again, she supposed what Thadrid did with eager women on his own time was his own business. There was to be a ball and accompanying banquet tonight to celebrate the coming wedding. In the bustle and rush, the three of them had managed to steal away to the stairwell before the sun rose, and all of them were swept into appointments and preparations for the rest of the day. Turning her attention back to the dark mixture in front of her, Amira decided the potion was ready. She fished a short paring knife from the pile of tools and unused ingredients at her side. Thadrid grimaced as she slit the knife across the back of her hand. He never once took his eyes away as she let several large drops of scarlet fall. For a moment, her blood bubbled on the surface before dissolving like steam. Amira put her hand to her mouth to stop the bleeding and stirred with her other. Her blood had seemed to work that first night she'd met the demon, so it should probably help now. So, Thadrid cleared his throat, sitting cross-legged between the two of them. Thadrid had decided to bring his cousin despite the stairs. Those had taken the knight a few extra minutes to descend. Thadrid was probably meant as a chaperone, though the idea of Thadrid chaperoning anyone was laughable. Thadrid glanced between the assassin and the archduke. Are we going to talk at all? What is there to say? Still sucking on her cut, Amira kept her attention on her task. I heard from Talon that a maid came and fetched you from your apartment last night. Thadrid cast a probing look to his cousin. One of her maids. He nodded toward Amira. Thadrid became most fascinated with the cauldron. Careful, Thadrid, Amira growled. I'm handling boiling liquids. Thadrid kept staring at Thadrid. She stirred the potion a few times, making sure her blood was evenly spread through the entire mixture. Once satisfied, she removed the ladle for the last time and picked up the slender calligraphy brush she had used yesterday. Thadrid's brows rose and he looked pointedly to Amira. No, Thadrid said hastily. No, I didn't. We didn't, You're hardly one to judge if we did, Amira snapped. I'm not judging. Thadrid spread his hands in a placating gesture. Just meddlesome. Well, I want you to stay out of it, Thadrid snapped. That was as close to a command as Amira had ever heard him give the other man. Amira's cheeks burned, annoyed both with Thadrid and what his meddling had brought to mind, but she needed to focus. All right, back to business. She stood, gesturing for Thadrid to sit several steps back from the fire. He complied, taking his place at a spot they'd decided on earlier. Amira dipped the brush in the pot of oil and studied the space around the archduke, gauging the distance. She started with the outward points, painting 6 roughly equidistant circles around the archduke before connecting them with a circle. Then she set to filling in the design, connecting the runes for binding, silencing, and sealing, so that they formed a whirling pattern. Thadrid had managed to smuggle several books to her from the Istavari collection. She'd copied out the runes before having Talon return the books, then sketched the symbols for hours. All the same, practicing them in miniature and executing them in the size she needed were two different things. Amira concentrated on her task, but was well aware of the knight and archduke watching her every move. Neither of them spoke. The minutes ticked by. Muscles ached along her shoulders and neck. Thadrid fidgeted and made small talk. Daedrith was as still as a statue, watching her with feverish intensity. Daedrith's stare was by far the greater distraction. Thadrid fell silent, stretching out his bad leg. He muttered to himself, watching the sorceress at work. Amira finished the wheel of runes and ran over the symbols with a second layer, then a third to make sure they were thoroughly marked. She crouched low over them, mouth pressed into a thin line. Finally, Amira sat up. She set aside the brush and surveyed her handiwork. The runes were painted in dark lines, arches, and curves. It wasn't a perfect circle, and wasn't anything worthy of framing on the wall, but the characters were legible, and should hold spells well enough. Amira dipped the brush in the pot again and dabbed it on her pointer finger. It stung for a moment, then cooled into an oily black smudge. Stepping up to Daedrith, she marked his left temple, then his right. He watched her the whole time, almost enough to make her hand shake. Lastly, she left a dot of the potion between his eyes. He didn't move, but his gaze never left her. It made her heart flip and tumble, and it was only by sheer force of will that she kept herself on task. It was a good thing Thadrid was here after all, she supposed. This next part she wasn't so sure about. She had to channel Ka into the mediums to activate their power. It was simple enough in theory, but she had limited practice. Her father had directed her studies more toward sabotage and assassination. Amira held her hands out over the edge of the runes. She closed her eyes and reached for Ka. Focus was key. She drew in a deep breath, inhaling until her lungs were full to bursting. Then she let it out as slowly as she could manage. Amira gathered Ka to herself as she had so many times before. She let it fill all the hidden spaces in the fibers of her body, flow through her like water through veins of rock. She channeled it down her arms and out the ends of her fingers. Thadrid gave a soft exclamation as the glow increased. Coppery light bled through her closed eyes. Amira kept on funneling Ka until it began to radiate back on her from the wheel of runes. Then she channeled more until she thought her hands were on fire and her sternum would burn. Gasping, she yanked her fingers back, ending the flow of energy, cradling her hands against her chest. A rusty glow still came from the circle of runes. "Are you all right?" Daedrith reached for her, then paused. He must not want to disturb what she was doing. "Fine." Amira peered down at the runes as the glow faded from sight, but the invisible glow of Ka remained. She frowned, not sure she was seeing right. The circle of runes had taken on a russet hue, strikingly like the color of Amira's hair. They had firmed and shone like enamel on the stones. The 3 dots she'd used to mark Daedrith's face were gone, as if they had never been there. He surveyed the circle of now rust-colored runes, curiosity creasing his brow. He said. Amira sat back on her heels. "How do you feel?" The furrow of Daedrith's brow deepened, and he chewed his lip for a moment. "He's gone, but that's normal when you're here." "We'll just have to see then." Amira cleared her throat and covered the cauldron with its heavy lid. There was less than half the mixture left. "I want to save this, in case we need it again." She glanced around. A few bricks were loose toward the base of the stairs. Grabbing the paring knife, she slid over to the wall and pried out a few stones. "Start clearing the signs of the fire and the unused pieces," she said over her shoulder. The two men said nothing in response to her command, but she heard them shuffling, disposing of the evidence. Ever so carefully, Amira removed stones until she managed to clear a space large enough for the cauldron. She stuffed it in the opening and replaced the bricks in front, sealing away the potion, moving the extra bricks to a less conspicuous spot beside the already crumbling staircase. Amira returned to help Daintrith and Thadrid. They had stuffed the ladle, pouches of extra ingredients, and assorted odds and ends into a sackcloth bag. Daintrith hadn't really spoken to her since last night. Maybe it was best that way. He'd left her about a half hour after he'd dragged her out of her nightmare, staying only long enough to see her calmed down again. Amira had laid awake for a good hour after that, thinking about the rhythm of his heartbeat and the warmth of his arms around her. But she'd die before she ever told him about that. Damn her girlish fantasies. Amira brushed away what remained of the fire's ashes, but she couldn't erase the black spot on the floor. She supposed, at worst, someone would think it was servants' mischief. When she finished and turned to the archduke, Daintrith had undone the top button of his shirt to readjust his collar. She looked away. It was a single button, showing barely 2 extra inches of skin, and no basis for the strange tingling sensation in the pit of her stomach. And certainly not for the abrupt urge to trace her fingers over his collarbone. Thadrid was watching. She knew he was. She could feel his eyes on her as she refused to look at Daintrith. Bastard. Arrogant bastard. She looked away until she was sure Daintrith had buttoned his collar again. When she looked back, he had one eyebrow raised. "I want you," she thought silently. "It's humiliating how badly I want you." Daintrith didn't break eye contact for a heartbeat too long. His hand flexed at his side and he faced his cousin. "Thadrid, I have to see Talon about my fitting for the ball tonight." He said it with a complete lack of enthusiasm. "Is your current wardrobe not dashing enough?" Daintrith ignored Thadrid's remark. "Could you see Amira to her apartment?" The archduke added to her. "The empress has arranged for me to entertain several nobles from the central fiefdoms, but I will try to visit you before this evening." The assassin wanted to ask why she couldn't come with him. She'd been attending all his other gatherings, but she had never been needy and wasn't about to start. "Very well," was all she said. "Of course," Thadrid assured him, "if you're not worried about leaving such an innocent blossom in the company of a rake like me." Daintrith arched one eyebrow. "Thadrid," he said it like a warning. "Careful," Amira added to the night with a venomous smile. "My compulsions are gone. I can kick your ass now." "Would you stoop to attacking a cripple?" Thadrid asked in mock scandal. "Yes." "Fine," Thadrid muttered. "I'll see her back to her apartment, and I'll even pretend to be a gentleman while doing it." That seemed to appease Daintrith. The archduke ascended the stairs first, sprinting up them 2 at a time. He must have been far later than he let on. "I'll see you both this evening." "Later," Thadrid shouted after him. Amira watched the archduke go, a strange twisting in her chest. "Well, my lady," the knight said, stepping to the foot of the staircase. I would offer you my arm, but seeing as how this staircase is only wide enough for one at a time, save your charm for more fertile hunting grounds." She snorted. Thadrid shrugged. "Habit." Amira shouldered past him and leapt up the steps. At the top, she leaned against the wall and waited. A lady like herself shouldn't travel the halls of the palace alone, since Shazni was off somewhere seeing to the duties of a lady's maid. And Daindrith had bolted. Thadrid was Amira's only option. Thadrid took a little longer to reach the top of the stairs. His bad leg had trouble bending at the hip, but he managed. Once the pair were both in the landing, he led the way into the castle's maze of halls. They hardly exchanged a word, and no one stopped them save for a few rounds of bowing from the handful of nobles they passed. A few of the palace courtiers and dignitaries had started recognizing Amira. The pair reached her apartment, past the guards, and the door closed. Amira had the feeling she was a hound being stuffed in the kennels. Thadrid waited in the foyer as she headed straight to the cold luncheon Shazni had left on the parlor table. Amira expected the knight to leave, but he remained there. "Do you have something to say?" In the other room, she could hear the chambermaids freshening the sheets and curtains in the bedroom. They weren't technically alone, any more than Amira had been technically alone with Daindrith in her room last night. Still, Thadrid lingering had the potential to start undesired rumors, especially with his reputation. The knight opened his mouth and closed it again. He glanced to the door, then helped himself to the armchair across from her. "I need to speak to you." Amira rolled her eyes. "This isn't about Daindrith's whereabouts last night, is it?" Thadrid didn't answer. "That's none of your business." "Daindrith is my cousin and my liege lord. That makes it my business." Thadrid hesitated, waiting. When she didn't comment, he went on. "Chastity is not one of my virtues." Amira scoffed. A masterpiece of understatement. "And I'll be the first to admit it. I can't even say for sure how many women—" "I don't want to hear about your dalliances, Thadrid. I really don't. My point is that Daindrith isn't like that. He's naive." "Get to the point and end this conversation. The faster, the better." Amira helped herself to a cup of tea. It had gone cold despite the quilted cover placed over the teapot. "Daindrith is a very kind-hearted individual, and I can see he cares for you more than he has any other woman." Thadrid twisted the buttons on his doublet. "I should hope so. He seems determined to marry me." "Yes, about that." Thadrid inhaled. "I don't want you to take advantage of him." Amira lowered her teacup. "What exactly do you mean by take advantage?" "I don't want you to exploit his feelings, Amira." Thadrid rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, Daindrith holds himself to certain moral standards. If he felt he'd fallen short of those standards, he would feel guilty." The knight shook his head. "Like most moral men, guilt has undue power over him. I don't want him guilted into anything. He's a good man." "He's the best man I've known," the assassin shot back. Thadrid frowned a little. "What?" "You heard me. I would never do anything to hurt him, or make him compromise." That last part was mostly true. She hoped he'd change his mind on some things, certainly after they were married, but for now. Thadrid's voice and expression were both flat when he replied. "You were trying to kill him not so long ago." Thankfully, he spoke in almost a whisper, quiet enough that the maids in the other room wouldn't overhear. People change. Priorities change. Amira set her teacup down. Now, I believe you have a palace full of simpering minxes awaiting your attention. Or do you have something useful planned for the day? Thadrid grumbled something that sounded suspiciously like Calethian mule driver curses. He hobbled to the door and slammed it after himself. Shazni slipped in before the door had stopped ringing with the sound. Though she must have heard the angry knight storm out, she made no comment. "Milady, you have several invitations we need to discuss. Also, Resman and I have finished the latest catalogue of your wedding gifts." Amira's stomach tightened at wedding, but she frowned at that name. "Resman?" "Your steward, milady." "Oh. Yes." Amira took another sip of tea to hide her unease. Already, she had more staff than she could count. "Thank you. Weren't the wedding gifts being catalogued by Talon?" Talon was Dangerous' valet, but doubled for many of the duties ordinarily attended by a steward. And some that would normally be tended by a lawyer. She briefly thought of Cromwell's dark shadow behind her father. "The gifts directed to His Highness, or both of you correct. But there have been a sizable number of gifts for you specifically over the past 3 days. Amira counted backward in her mind. They started arriving since the tournament. Shazni's lips pursed, but she inclined her head. "It's possible the gifts simply hadn't arrived yet, but yes, most of them have arrived since the tournament." She never would have thought an archery contest would earn her favor in this court, but it seemed Vesha knew better. All the same, Amira couldn't decide if the Empress was her enemy or ally. "Would you like me to send for Resman and we can go over the gift tallies thus far?" The assassin exhaled a long breath. That in addition to the pile of unanswered invitations already collecting beside the door. "Refuse all of those," she said, pointing to the pile of folded stationery. "But keep records of who sent invitations. I will host my own gathering in the next week, and I want to invite everyone who invited me." Shazni covered her mouth and her eyes sparkled. "I think that a fine compromise, milady." "Did I say something funny?" "No, milady." Shazni straightened her face. "No, it's only several of the other ladies' maids have told me." She cleared her throat. "Well, there are some gentlewomen who have had their doubts about you." "About if I can be a proper archduchess, you mean?" Amira did her best not to bristle at that. "Contrary to popular belief, I was not left to run wild after my mother's banishment." The assassin suspected she'd been subjected to more discipline and rules than any of those women. "I meant no offense, my lady," Shazni said, eyes falling to the floor. Had she sounded offended? Amira was about to answer when a knock sounded from the entryway. Dangerous slipped in and quickly shut the door after himself. He appeared much as he had earlier, if a little more rumpled. "You're dismissed," Amira said to Shazni. The lady's maid glanced between the two of them but said nothing. Discretion was one of the most desirable traits in a personal servant. It was one of the things she appreciated most about her head staffer, but Amira supposed Shazni could be gossiping like a drunk tanglewife, and she'd be none the wiser. "I'll be with the other girls sorting the wardrobe if you need me, milady." Shazni bowed and disappeared back into Amira's apartment. Amira thought it took an inordinately long amount of time for the archduke to meet her gaze, but when he did, his face held a faint smile. Her chest clutched. "Well?" He hesitated, keeping his voice down. "It works well enough." Amira's hope drowned in disappointment. What do you mean? It works, Amira. Daedrith stepped closer. Not as well as being close to you, but it helps. Amira arched one eyebrow. It really doesn't do anything, does it? No, Amira, it does something, it's just... Impotent? Daedrith's nose wrinkled at her word choice. Feebler than you. Amira folded her arms across her chest. She thought the ward would either work or not. Partial success grated her more than an outright failure. Daedrith must have seen her look of displeasure. I battled Ka-Is alone for nearly a decade, Amira. Believe me, I appreciate all the help I can get. He was trying to lighten her mood. Your spell makes it bearable. That's more than I could have asked. Amira suspected he was playing up the spell's effectiveness for her benefit. Did he think she was unable to deal with failure? Still, she didn't want to press the issue. She doubted he would outright lie, so that meant the spell must have some effect. The assassin tapped her forefinger against her opposite elbow, considering her next move. I wanted to tell you that much. Daedrith flourished a shallow yet gallant bow. I'll see you tonight. They stared at one another for a long series of heartbeats, neither sure of what to say. Then Daedrith bowed one last time and slipped back out the door.